Looks like we have a good number of folks, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So hopefully we can stay on time. First thing, just to make you aware of, the meeting is recorded. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that. My name is Jenny Cole-Mossman, and I want to welcome you to the first webinar for the Continuums of Care on asset mapping. We are one of the TTA providers for this work. There's two other TTA providers, and we all have been working together to do a series of webinars, and they'll be doing some soon. The National Criminal Justice Institute Reform, NCIJR, I can only say, sorry. And I are our partners, and we're happy to be doing TTA for all of you with them. So next slide. I should go over just a couple of housekeeping things. You all are doing exactly what I asked earlier, which is putting your name in there and where you're from. We would like this to be interactive, so as we go through, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you to ask a question, or you can put questions in the chat and we will answer those. You did receive a copy of the asset mapping tool when you got your reminder, but after this is over, we'll send out the slides and recording and the tool again. So if you didn't get it or you haven't looked at it yet, that's okay. We'll be sending that afterwards. Just a few things for you to think about, the vision and the mission of OJJDP. So where all children are free from crime and violence, and where the contact with the juvenile justice system should be rare, fair, and beneficial. And the mission here for you to take a look at and be thinking about as we're working through these slides and doing our work. But just to provide the national leadership, coordination, and resources to prevent and respond to youth delinquency and victimization. Next slide. And this is us, so I will tell you a little bit about myself, and then I will turn it over to my co-presenters. So I am with JBS International. I've been here about 5 years. I've been doing training and technical assistance for the Office of Victims of Crime and for the Rural Opioid Projects through the Health Resources Services Administration. I'm a therapist, so prior to that, I was at the University of Nebraska Center on Children, Families, and the Law. And worked both in the court improvement project, and we had a project that did training for infant mental health and reflective practice. So I will turn it over to Romero first.
Thank you very much, Jenny. I appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. My name is Romero Davis. I am Director of Child and Family Wellbeing with agency Social Current, who is partnering with JBS in this initiative. So it is a pleasure. I'm located in San Antonio, Texas. In my work, I work very closely with obviously children and families. I've been working with, in particular with juvenile youth, crossover juvenile youth, oh gosh, for a good 20, 25 years, whether that's been in the kind of social justice space, or whether that's been in restorative justice and restorative practices, as well as gang intervention, violence prevention, domestic violence, human trafficking, sexual assault as well. So again, just a pleasure to be with everyone, a pleasure to spend this time with you all. Thank you for joining us. And I will pass it over to you, Monica.
Awesome. Thanks, Romero. Welcome, everyone. I'm Monica Miles Steffens. I'm the Assistant Director at the Juvenile Justice Institute. We're housed at the University of Nebraska in the School of Criminal Justice and Criminology, and have worked in juvenile justice in Nebraska for the past 25 years, doing all kinds of different things from direct care and juvenile detention to strategic planning, community development, program development, at the local and state level. So it's a great to be partners with JBS in this training and technical assistance initiative, and I'm excited to be here with you today.
Thanks all. And I see some of the other TTA providers on, so thank you for joining us. And if you wouldn't mind putting your names in the chat and that you're one of the TTA providers, that would be great. Just so we can see, you know, who your grant coach might be on. We want to take just a little bit of time to situate this webinar, thinking about this continuum of care. So you're probably all familiar with this when you did your application. But when we're thinking about asset mapping, we want to be thinking about all the entire continuum. So, you know, from prevention all the way to those out-of-home placements and community reintegration. And we also want to be thinking about the middle of that circle. So thinking about how we're involving youth, family, and community in this asset mapping process. So just kind of want to anchor our work here today with this. Next slide. So you're probably all aware of these program objectives, but we, again, are just going to try to anchor things for you as we get started in thinking about building this continuum in order to be able to, you know what available resources and gaps are. We need to have something to do that. And part of that is going to be the asset mapping. But again, thinking all the way through that continuum. And then we can do the rest of these objectives, right? Like the promising and evidence-based approaches and thinking about the economic impact, but we can't do that unless we really do some of this good work on the front end. Next slide. So you do have a requirement in your grant, as I'm sure you all know, for asset mapping within the jurisdictions to identify leveraged resources and policy practice strategies for implementation. So I think that's bold. And I just, you know, we oftentimes when we're thinking about asset mapping, we might be thinking about services or what's available, but also really want to call out that second part of, you know, what policies and what practices might there be that can assist in this continuum of care. Some of that has to do, and we'll talk more, but like comes to mind first for me, like coordination, you know, how are things coordinated and how these services get to folks might be some of those policies and practice strategies. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Monica. And again, if you're new, because there's still people coming in, we're putting our names in. And I know I saw Scott Pestridge on here. I don't know if there's any other grant managers, but if you would also put your name in the chat and just say hello to everyone, you are being recorded. I'm going to turn it over to Monica, and we aren't just going to talk at you the entire time. We are going to have some time for you to discuss things with each other. So hang on with us for a little bit. So I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jenny. I think what's important for you to know is that this isn't the only time we'll be talking about asset mapping. And so today we're just dipping our toe in the water, introducing you to a tool that we created for you, but that we also want to create some space for some peer-to-peer conversation and learning here. And at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what we'll be sharing at the national conference as well. So just know that there's more to come, and there's more to this asset mapping piece as part of your broader strategy in developing your continuum planning process. So just really quickly, when we talk about asset mapping, I know you all come at this from lots of different experiences. Maybe for some of you, this is new. For some of you, you've been doing asset mapping for a long time. So if you could just put in the chat, from your perspective, what is a community asset? We'd love to kind of hear what you're thinking when you hear community asset. Don't be shy. Somebody needs to be the first one. Great. Okay. Services, right? Formal services, existing resources, leaders. Great. Resources. Something that supports community members, meets their needs, positive resources, community partners, safe spaces, broad services. Great. Okay, you guys are doing great now. Good job. And you're all exactly right, right? And our community assets really are unique to our own communities. And depending on what you're defining as a community for the purpose of this project. So I think that's really important that you are all on the right track with that. So next slide. So for the purpose of the tool that we created for you, we did define asset mapping, and that is a process that helps communities think broadly about the individuals, groups, services, interventions, policies, practices, those things that support youth and families to help them grow and thrive. So often when we do planning processes, I think in the past, I know in the planning processes I've been involved in, we kind of start with our gaps, and that's the easiest place for our minds to go to because we think about the things that we're missing. And so the really great thing about asset mapping is we're starting to think about strengths. We're starting to think about those things in our communities that are strength-based, that are positive, that really are sometimes formal, right? A lot of you mentioned formal services, government entities, formal nonprofit organizations, those kinds of things that we know have been around for quite a while. But there's also those informal things. So our faith-based organizations, those informal supports that we know exist in our communities that really are there for the long term, right? When youth and families are no longer system impacted and are still in their communities needing different types of support. I think the other great thing about asset mapping is it helps us really dig deep into our communities to find those beyond those prominent things that we're all aware of to those hidden potentials for partnership and collaboration and resources and things that maybe help us be more creative than we sometimes get stuck in our boxes and our silos, and we learn about really great opportunities, things that are just grassroots that are things that can be really beneficial to our communities. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to have you drop in the chat again. So who do you think should participate in an asset mapping process? Who should be at the table? Great. Stakeholders? Natural community members? Absolutely. Youth, for sure. Families? Exactly. Youth, families, providers, government entities, schools. Yeah, definitely schools. Anyone involved with youth and families. Exactly. So go ahead, Heather. Yep. So asset mapping really is a process that requires participation by all members of the community, however you're defining that for your project. But particularly those who are consumers of services and are not often at formal decision-making tables. And that is something that is required of this planning process, is that we're engaging those voices, youth and family voices, underrepresented populations, everyone at the table, right? So it's really important to be thinking about that as who do you need to reach out to, who do you need to engage? And this can be done in formal processes, right? Formal meetings that already exist by creating new spaces for people to engage and really thinking about how do you meet people where they're at, particularly youth and families who you want to partner and get their voice in this process. Okay, next slide. All right, I think it's also important to think about what asset mapping is not. So asset mapping is really kind of what I relate to like an environmental scan, right? We're trying to get as much information about the positive things in our community as possible. We're not really doing formal research or evaluation, and I think that's an important distinction. It doesn't mean that you can't, but I would encourage you, if you do choose to go that direction, to partner with your local community, universities, colleges, to help engage in that process. The other thing that's important, and in the work that we've already been doing with some of our sites, this comes up, but it's not a measurement of individual program effectiveness. I think that's really the next step, right? That you think about in your planning process and looking at gaps and needs. So really asset mapping is laying your foundation so you kind of know what all is out there and what you have. And that next step is thinking about, okay, are those assets the things we really need? Are those assets being effective? Are they serving the right target populations? Those kinds of things. So that's how you use, one of the ways you can use that asset map is to think about how to go to the next level in terms of effectiveness. Next slide, great. So there are, in the tool that we put together for you, you'll see it's not an exhaustive list. Asset mapping, there are all kinds of models out there across all kinds of disciplines. And so it's really, really difficult to put everything into one toolkit for you. But we tried to identify the ones that were most prominent and maybe most useful. But as you think about it, you can choose to do asset mapping however meets your needs in your community. If you do want to choose a specific model or as you're thinking about your approach to asset mapping, it's important to we put together just a few things to think about. One of those being budget, right? So you have funding in your grant right now to think about asset mapping, but thinking that you want to make sure to create something in an asset mapping process that you can sustain, because this should be something that's built into your implementation and your ongoing work as you move forward beyond just this planning grant. Thinking about time intensity and staff capacity. And we did in the tool kind of try to rate these models in terms of some of these different approaches so that you can kind of see, depending on how much staff capacity you have, how much time you have built in to do your asset mapping, it's important to, again, think about what your capacity is. And being able to do models with fidelity to the process, right? So that you're getting the right information and the best information for your project. Romero's going to talk about this in just a few minutes, but equity is really important. Again, getting those voices from those individuals, those providers, neighborhoods, the voices that really need to be at the table to make a well-rounded asset map. We have a broad continuum, right, of rural and urban grantees. And so thinking about geography, and if you're doing focus groups, if you're using surveys, making sure that your target populations have access to transportation and to internet, those types of things that make sure that we try to have equitable access for everyone to participate. Evidence informed, some of our models range from very low intensity, easy things like SWOT analysis to very high fidelity, high strategies like SIM mapping. And so it doesn't have to be evidence informed, but we've tried to give you opportunities to use strategies that will get you the best results. Technology, again, if you're wanting to do really sophisticated surveys, think about partnering with local universities and colleges so that they can help. It's a great student project. Speaking from a university hat on sometimes, it's great projects for students to help you with these kinds of things and really can help you have a project that's more economical. And the last thing to think about is training. Some of these models do require specific training. Those trainings do require cost. So making sure you think about those as you select your asset mapping strategies. Next slide. So this is a picture, a snapshot of what the front of the tool looks like. Again, you'll see as you read through it, we've highlighted different ones. Some of these were already highlighted in the OJJDP RFP. Others were ones that we've, through our networks of technical assistance providers, were aware of that we felt might be good matches for you. And like I said, we've tried to identify kind of the intensity level so that it'll help you gauge which model might be best if you're looking for a model for your project. And again, we'll send that out after this webinar. So I'm going to turn it over to Romero to talk briefly about how do we engage youth and families in asset mapping.
Thank you very much, Monica. So I got a quick question, and I know it's probably an easy question, easy answer rather, maybe. But why in the world should we think about engaging youth and families when we're thinking about creating this continuum of care in terms of asset mapping? Anyone? Love to hear. Please put it in the chat. You can come off mute, whatever works for you. Why in the heck? Why youth and families? That's right. That's right. First person. They know the gaps, experience, use the services, all of those things. First person knowledge, everything. No, you all are obviously right on the money. And the reality of it is that sometimes it's tough for us to do these things. It is because we think about the aspects of power sharing when we think about engaging youth and families and some other things. Next slide, please. So when we think about community asset mapping, the thing that I want you to really hold on to is community asset. When we think about asset, we think about things that are of value. We think about the things that are strength based. We think about those um, what is really working within the communities. And I think that's something that's really important because as you're thinking about this asset mapping for the work that this project is going to take, there's going to be some things that aren't going to need to be recreated, right? And so when we think about creating these things from a strength-based approach, it helps with that. Those are the things, I always say that sustainability lives within community. And the goal of that is to make sure that those existing resources, as well as maybe the things that we don't think about, because we know that our community has a bunch of different identities. um, yeah, I'm sorry, Renee. I got distracted by your comment there. But no, yeah, a bunch of different ways, identities that live within the community. So it's important to understand the existing resources and those strengths to continue to think about how you are constructing your asset mapping and even who you're doing that with, which should be communities and families that are involved. And that process there is really important. And then obviously how you are approaching the people within the communities from that asset-based mentality is really important because again, it promotes the strengths. It promotes the capacities that align with how folks see wellness and well-being in their communities. Next slide, please. So just a couple things, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but when we are looking at engaging youth and families in this asset mapping, obviously we always want to highlight the strengths. You know what? I always go back to any of my hip hop fans that are out there. There is a young man by the name of Tupac Shakur who said that, you shouldn't marvel at the fact that a rose is growing in the concrete, but you should actually marvel at the tenacity that the rose has to grow in such an environment. And that's the piece there is highlighting those strengths, highlighting the things and the beauty behind the communities and the ways that communities have been able to thrive and live with resilience. Also, just as a tip, look at those participatory approaches, engaging members through interactive activities, brainstorming sessions, mapping exercises where folks can physically contribute their ideals. Again, some communities have places where they're playing chess or, nowadays pickleball and all these other things. And so you'll be surprised at where the participatory approaches could really help bring great ideals. And the other thing about engaging youth and families is, again, it fosters inclusivity and it leads by examples and it lets folks know in the communities that they are the ones that are most important and most knowledgeable about the things that they need. Next slide, please. And again, some other tips. Hosting community gatherings, being in proximity, with community and youth, those town halls and potlucks and family days, and look at involving the key community leaders. You know, sometimes those key community leaders and influencers are the folks that work at the corner stores, the bodegas, the different places and spaces. And those things are important. And Deborah, I see you there. I want to get to that. You're conducting asset mapping in hotspot areas where yeah, exactly. And you know, in areas where you do have those hot spots and in those crime areas, we can get into this more, Deborah. I don't have anything in particular to put up on a slide, but we can talk more about this. I would say, you know, even in high crime areas, there's points of contact. There's people there that can help engage. I've dealt with this many times, especially in high gang violence areas, and actually have partnered with gang leaders and different folks in areas, and we were able to have some really, really positive positive um, outreach to those in the community. Because believe it or not, no matter where they are in community, everybody wants to be safe. Everybody wants to sleep well. Um, and again, as you're creating those asset maps in local places, you know, you want to encourage that family to contribute. And believe it or not, I also believe in those hot spots is where you're going to get the best information. They're going to tell you the best because they've been surviving in it for a long time. So I got you. I definitely got you. Next slide, please. And also celebrate, you know, celebrate, acknowledge your community's efforts. And not only that, the community strength. So many times we get data around community and we don't ever share those things with community. So celebrate those things and be creative to involve more people, different platforms, social media, you know, TikTok and some of these things are just, you know, ways to share and to get ideals and experiences. And after all of those things are done, don't go ghost on them. You know, make sure that they stay involved. Make sure that the investment isn't about, you know, their voice in the community mapping or asset mapping isn't just about the one thing. They should be involved in it all the way long. So make sure you share that data. It is so important. Next slide, please. And I will pass it over to, I think, Monica.
Great. And so I think we just really quick wanted to touch on too, before we put you into some breakout rooms for some discussion. We get questions a lot about, okay, so we created this map, what do we do with it next, right? And so that is really kind of up to you all, but here's just some suggestions, but this map should really guide your next steps, right? So as you lay out your assets, it really should create questions for you around what do you want to ask those people in those hotspot areas, in those focus groups that you're doing? Can guide those focus group questions. It can guide you towards what kinds of data you want to collect, and what gaps you want to start exploring. As you lay out those physical maps, sometimes these models will have you plot different things on an actual map, right? And you can really visually see where those gaps and things are. It helps you examine, like I said earlier, it can take you to the next level, right? So examining the effectiveness of those assets. You might find that you have lots of mentoring programs, but they're all clustered in one area, and maybe you need them in other areas or need them to spread out. And once you know where those assets are and those credible messengers and those informal supports and those neighborhood organizations that could be those partners, you can create some really beautiful next steps in your communities. So like I said, it helps you examine who's missing, maybe who's not being served, who needs to be served, who those non-traditional partners could be, and who you want to collaborate with. We really encourage you to make asset maps accessible to the community. So once you do those asset mapping strategies and activities, make sure that those are given back to the people that you talk to and in your community. Some sites have them on a website. Some sites have them visible in their different offices around the community. However it fits best in your strategy, but really make sure that those asset maps are kind of a living, breathing document too, or visual, so that people know where to access those positive supports. And then obviously, finally, it does need to be a part of your final plan that you submit to OJJDP. So.
I just want to highlight, Monica, that sharing it back. I have some other grantees on a different grant that had Spanish language interpreters for pregnant and parenting mothers, and no one was using them. And it was because no one knew they were there. And once they knew where they were there, they were using it. But it was when they kind of put together some of these like assets that they had for pregnant and parenting mothers that people started using that. So they can be beyond just an assessment tool. They can really, provide people with some of the resources in your community. So. All right, so we feel like you've seen our talking heads enough, and we know that you probably enjoy talking to other grantees who are in similar situations. So I want you to think about these questions, but if other things come up, like feel free to talk about them. We want to put you in some breakout groups just to briefly share where you're from. If you've started with an asset mapping model or you're considering one, what is that, or what are you considering? And thinking about what strategies are you using or are you planning to use to engage youth and families in asset mapping? And you may all be at different points in this, and that's okay. And then we'll come back together for some time to just kind of report out, so you don't have to take any detailed notes, but just kind of want you to have some time to talk with each other about the asset mapping process. So we are going to assign you to breakout rooms.
Yes, and rooms
for about
are
15 minutes.
Yep, rooms are ready, good folks. With a click of a button, you are all gonna magically appear in this land of
We
Zoom
hope,
breakout.
right?
We will see you all here very, very shortly. I'm opening up the rooms now.
So, like Lakia just said, we know 15 minutes sounds like a long time until you get to jumping in and having discussions. So we would love to just hear from each group. We have about 8 minutes to hear some of your takeaways from your discussion. What were things that surprised you, or that you were excited to hear, or that you want to share from a site? We'd love some brave people to share their takeaways.
I will add that, right now my focus is, how to appropriately engage youth and family with the protections of the youth population. That does make this challenging. But because we have now been able to get our full 18 months, we have some time to figure that out and be assertive as possible with getting that. So we are working with our consulting agency on this grant with the IRBs and getting the best type of advice and tips and guidance as we go down this path and engaging our youth and families. I can say that the 18 and older and the parents, I'm not as concerned with gathering data from them, but yeah, the youth under 18, that's just still a work in progress and trying to figure out exactly what that will look like for us.
I would second that. That's the thing that we're struggling with, especially in a very rural location, is that getting a bunch of youth together creates a lot of complications and challenges. And so I think we're looking to engage them. We're looking to engage different youth groups. So the 18, as you said, the 18 to 25 is not as problematic. We have some youth groups that are not justice involved youth that we will be talking to, which is also not as problematic. And then we will probably be doing individual types of individual types of conversations with our justice involved youth, because as I said to my group, we have one high school, and so trying to make sure that we're protecting those youth as well.
Great, thank you. That's good feedback and insight for us to think about. What other takeaways do people have? Beyond maybe, are there different models that people talked about that you're using that you didn't see in the guide that are helpful, or experiences getting started on a model? Well, we'd love to hear some of your conversations.
You can pop it in the chat too if you don't want to unmute.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say, this is Deborah Furtado. I thought the thing I didn't think about, and we're working on this CVIP grant, the community violence grant, is that we've already met with the community in the hotspot areas, but I think we go back. I think what I learned from this is we go back, we have, like, we call it asset mapping, or really asking them about resources, especially the youth. I saw some of the comments too. We have a youth commission, but we're working with the school district. I want to get with them and see what they think. And so that is probably my biggest takeaway. I just love this, and I love the different models that y'all put out there. So this is definitely worth my time. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I think that's great, asking them, who are those people, right? Who are those people that support you and that you feel supported by? I think you'll find some really rich information. So.
Now just add, because I shared with my breakout group that the Elkhart County, we already applied for our no cost extension. And so that definitely gave us a lot of room and breather room, and reduce some of the stress of trying to quickly get through the project without the full 18 months. So now having that makes all the difference.
Great. What were Deborah had kind of that light bulb moment. What were some other light bulb moments for people? Yes, we will send out the slides. Yep. Well, we're a shy group today. Very curious about what best practices are around IRB questions in this process. Yeah, David, I know we've talked about this, right? Do other people, are other people engaging IRB in their youth focus groups, or I'd be curious to know.
So we have yet to do that, but that's the plan, because I can't go forward with talking with juveniles without talking with an IRB board. So we're fully prepared to go to full board with it as well, just given the fact that we're going to be talking about justice involved youth. So.
And Adrian, are you with a university, or?
Yeah, I'm with the University of Wyoming.
Okay.
And so Albany County is subcontracted with us to do this project.
Okay, great.
So.
Yeah, we're the same setup, so we'll be running ours through IRB as well.
And Annie, what side are you from?
Denver, so University of Colorado.
Great. Okay.
Maybe an additional takeaway is if you don't have a university partner and you're like, oh my goodness, that you could meet the university partner. I think I'll have to look for it, but there was a site of universities that wanted to like partner on things, or like, Monica was saying before. So
There are independent IRBs too. So I do some research in human trafficking, and we as a nonprofit use an independent IRB instead of university. So David, I don't know your exact situation, but if you did want to run through an external IRB, there are a couple different organizations that specialize in that, and a lot of them are related to youth and protected populations.
We do have access through our consulting agency one of my questions here has to do with this relationship between these consulting agencies and the work we're doing in communities here. And anyway, they're very helpful in many ways, and sometimes there are these barriers. So one of the questions I would have is like, if it's really difficult to do a focus group without a really rigorous IRB process, for example, can we have a youth planning council that mirrors the organizational planning council and get just parental? Do we have to go through an IRB process to have a youth planning council that we pay them to come and look at our data and give us feedback on it? Or is that data gathering that needs to be passed through an IRB?
So we might have to have another little mini webinar about this maybe, but, and I'm even though I'm with the Institute, I'm not a researcher, but I know for us in being able to go just talk in general with focus groups, because we're not doing high level research and individual level data points with folks, it's just gathering information. That has usually, we run it through our IRB board, but it's never causes a problem. Like we've been able to move forward and do that work without they've approved it and not given us any pushback on that.
So David, I might be able to add something to this, and this is specific to our situation, but might help you in your situation. So we're talking with a lot of the different agencies, and we're just collecting information from them. So we're not asking them about their personal opinions about different things. We're just asking them, what services do you provide? What's your budget? What are your capacity levels? And for that, so because I'm with a university, I have to go through the IRB, right? Like it's not an option for me. But on that piece of it, so kind of talking more generally, we weren't required to go through the IRB for that. I think our community partners are actually very open to thinking about having those general conversations where we're not asking specific questions about their behaviors or their opinions on different things. We will be working through the school district that's where the youth advisory board is. That's not justice involved youth, but is just youth in general. So I suspect that we'll still put an IRB through, but my guess is that they'll be less concerned about that because it's within the school environment versus the justice involved youth, where we're talking to them about sort of their experiences within the system. So I think it also depends on your population in terms of what you might be thinking about in terms of enhanced protections for those juveniles, for example.
Thanks, Adrienne. I appreciate that. We want to be mindful of everyone's time. So on this last slide, we just have a few of the upcoming opportunities. At OJJDP, we will be doing an extended asset mapping breakout session, and we'll have a grantee that's joining us from Place Matters in Maine to talk about their model. We'll be sending out soon some power hours. Jenny will be doing one soon around reflective practice. And our other TA providers, we're working on a series of webinars, so stay tuned because information about that will be coming out soon. And then please mark your calendars. The Continuum of Care grantee convening dates have been secured for March 18th through the 20th in Minneapolis. So please hold those dates in your calendar with more information to come on that agenda.
Thanks, everybody. If you met someone today in your breakout group or you heard something, be sure to let your coach know, and we can always help facilitate more peer time because we know 15 minutes wasn't long. So let us know. But thank you for everybody, and thanks for participating. It was nice to see you. We hope to see you all soon.